guest speakers here this morning. I don't, but pretend I did. And one of those guests was someone who grew up in an all-star Christian family home, perfect Sunday school and church attendance, no major, wild living, married that perfect spouse, perfect kids, is well-versed in scriptures, and honestly is a very nice, great, all-around nice person. And this person wants to come and tell you his story. The other guest is someone who grew up in, well, you might call it a one-parent home because dad was gone. Mom was always working, and when she was home, she was either strung out on drugs or drunk and moved from one man to another. And this man grew up in such an environment. He grew up and also made bad choices, even ended up in prison. But he found Christ in prison, and his life was radically changed. Two possible guests. They both love the Lord. They both are serving the Lord. Whose story would you rather listen to? The first one or the second one? Probably the second one, right? And why? Why do we like those kind of stories where there is a radical life transformation? Might that be why we really like the parable of the prodigal son? This morning we continue in Luke 15, where we have three parables, two of which we looked at last week. Our present parable, I believe, is the longest parable that Jesus told. And not only that, it's a little bit different. It goes along with the first two that we saw, the parable of the lost sheep and the lost coin. But in addition to being longer than those, and longer, like I said, of all the parables Jesus told, this one has a twist to it. It's not just about a son who, leaves home, runs off and sows wild oats, and then returns to his loving father. There's also a story about an older brother. My passage will be Luke 15, 11 through 32. For our scripture reading, I'm not going to read all those verses, but I am going to read verses 21 through 24. So I encourage you to find your sword, the Word of God, and find Luke 15 and stand as I read verses 21 through 24. I take it that most of you know the story, so we're kind of in the middle of it, but we'll come back and pick it up. But verse 21, the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." 22, but the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. And may God add his blessing to the reading of his word. You may be seated. There's a lot into the story. How many know this story? Yep. How many love this story? There is some really neat, fun stuff here. And so it's a long passage, and I want to just jump right back into it and see what I can share with you. Again, this is the third of three parables that Jesus is telling in this chapter. So let's pick it up at verse 11, where it says, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had two sons." Now, we like to call this the parable of the prodigal son for good reason. But you notice right away that it starts off talking about two sons. Two sons. You can even say it's even about a father, because it says there was a man who had two sons. In the previous parables, what makes the parable of the prodigal son interesting is, compared to the first two, is that in the previous parables, we really didn't have much information, told more about the 99 sheep that weren't lost. We're not really told much of anything about the 9 coins that were not lost. The emphasis was on that which was lost, that one sheep that got lost, and that one coin that got lost. But in this story here, not only is there an emphasis upon the one who was lost, who we call the prodigal, but also about the son who stayed back. What about him? So this story has a little twist to it. Verse 12, the younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." Think inheritance. Generally speaking, if one were to receive an inheritance, what has to happen? It's not a trick question. Somebody's got to die. In this case, we're talking about a father. But the fact is, he's not taking his father's life. He wants an inheritance earlier. The fact that the younger son is asking his father for the estate now is tantamount to saying what? Dad, I wish you were dead. But I'll still take what is allotted to me. I don't want you, but I want your possessions. I'll take your hard-earned money, but I don't want you. Now, as the younger son, what would he receive? Assuming that there are just two sons in this family, the younger son would receive a third of the inheritance. Do you remember why? Because the firstborn would receive what? A double portion. And so he would receive, assuming there's no other siblings, a third of the estate. Later on in the story, it would appear that this father is a wealthy man. And so, even at this stage of the game, the young son, when he's asking for the money, he's probably going to get a decent amount of money. However, assuming that the father's estate would grow wealthier over time, if the son would just wait, he could have likely gotten a greater inheritance when he was much older. But this boy here, he cannot wait. He wants his money, and he wants it now. Verse 12, still in verse 12. So he divided his property between them. Now, it's suggested that this younger son was an older teen. Let's just say 18. I don't know, but let's just think 18. As an older teen, let's just say it. What is on his mind? I hear wine, women, and what? And songs, she says. Think hormones, right? No mother is mentioned. Maybe she's already passed. We already know what he thinks about his dad. I want your money, but I don't want you. And as we'll see, he's going to run off to the far country. So think about it. Here you got a young man, 18 or so, hormones, no parental authority. He's got a wad of cash, so to speak. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right? You see where we're headed here? I mean, it's just that you know where this is going. This is not going to be good. Verse 13. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Now, I want you to understand how shameful this would have been for a Jew back then. Because as a good Jew, you're supposed to stay in the land. You don't travel off to the far country, because that's where the Gentiles are. That's unclean. You didn't do that. What he's doing here would have brought shame upon his father, would have brought shame upon the community. He's walking away from his family, his community, we can say his religion, his heritage. And while this son was off in a distant country, he finally gets the freedom that he's always been wanting, which is what? Unrestrained living. That's what he wants, right? Give me money, leave me alone, let me go off and do my thing. Why do people reject God? How about this answer? Many do because it interferes with their lifestyle. If I believed in God, then I would have to be accountable to him. Fine. I don't believe in God. I'm not accountable to him. And where does such freedom eventually lead to? Where does such thinking ends up? Verse 14. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. Uh-oh, the honeymoon is over. The chickens have come home to roost. The party is over. He has spent it all. I wonder how long it took from the point of plenty to the point of in need. Did he spend it in 1 week? Did it take a year? I don't know. He probably had more than enough when he was back home with Dad. But now, in a far-off country, with his bank account now dry, plus with the added tragedy of a severe famine, you see that? he may have been learning for the first time what it was like to truly be in need. Maybe for the first time, he realized that he cannot always live off of mom and dad, and that he now has to get a what? Get a job. Get a job. You know, people don't recognize their need for God, oftentimes I think because they don't think they are in need. I don't need the Lord because I have everything I need. I have everything right now. If I do need something, I can go out and buy it, or I can pay somebody else to do it. I'm doing just fine on my own. But what happens when you get to the point when you're not fine on your own? Verse 15. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. What nationality is this young man? Presumably he's what? A Jew. And he's forced to do what kind of work? Feeding what? Pigs? For a Jew to work with an unclean animal, you see the situation here? Let me give you a quote from one author. He writes, quote, talking about feeding pigs, this was no real employment at all. Swine herding paid next to nothing, not even enough to meet the immediate needs of the prodigal. Feeding pigs was also extremely demeaning work. It was virtually the lowest possible chore in the whole hierarchy of labor. It required no skill whatsoever, so this was a role often given to people who were mentally deficient, bereft of all social skills, or otherwise unfit for life in polite society, unquote. Of course, pig farming today does not have this exact same kind of connotation, but you know what's still true today? That pigs are dirty and smelly and filthy. Anybody here ever worked with pigs? They're not the most pleasant of smell, right? But in this story, we see how low he has gone. He is at a very degrading place in his life. Now, do you think when this man first received daddy's money that he would ever thought that he would be in the position he is here? Right? Did he ever think that it would come to this? Isn't that true even today of sin? Temptation likes to present itself as something good about how good it would feel right now. It doesn't want you to think of the future. It doesn't want you to think of the consequences. In fact, this young man in our passage, he has sunk so low that you know he even got jealous of the pigs. Did you know that? Look at verse 16. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. How many here have been desperate for pig food? And remember what kind of time this is going on. What's going on at this time? There's a what? Severe what? Famine. Food is scarce. This isn't just I'm hungry. Where should I eat after church? This is, think skin on bones. This is bad. He looks at the pigs that he's feeding and he thinks, if only I was a pig, so to speak. How did he ever get to this place? You know how he got to this place? It started when he said, Dad, give me my inheritance and let me go and do my own thing. He has hit rock bottom, right? And what if I said he is exactly at the right place that he needs to be? Do you know where I'm getting at here? Sometimes rock bottom is the right place. Look at verse 17. When he came to his senses, so apparently he wasn't in the right sense of mind. He said, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. He sounds repentant to me. It's not just that he recognizes he's made a mess of his life. What does he plan to tell his father? Father, I have what? Sinned. He doesn't make excuses for the choices he made. This isn't dad's fault. This isn't brother's fault. He's admitting this is all me, and I admit it. And what's interesting about these verses is what it basically says about his father. He wants to go back to father. It's as if he realizes that life with dad really wasn't that bad as I thought it would be. That maybe dad is a good guy. That dad even takes care of his servants. Maybe those seemingly pointless rules forced upon him as a child were actually good because it built character and discipline. You see the parallel between this son and father and a person in God? He decides to go back home. And what is interesting to ask is what he could show for himself. With all the money that dad gave him, what can he show for it? What if dad required a repayment on the inheritance? What part of his inheritance might he be able to offer back to his father? What can he say? Yes, Dad, I really squandered your money, but let me show you something that I can show for it. What's he going to offer? What good thing can he show his father that might sway his father to receive him back? Can he say to his father, I promise you, ... He's got nothing good to offer his father, does he? He's got nothing. Except for one thing I'm going to suggest. He's got hope. He's got hope in a dad that will take him back. If not as a son, then as a hired hand. Look at verse 19. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. Very interesting. A hired man back then was actually lower than a slave. And yet, how did dad treat his hired men back in verse 17? He fed them so well that there was leftovers. What did it take for this young man to realize that dad was a nice guy after all? It took him hitting rock bottom. But now the question is, will father receive him back? Back then, maybe. But it's going to take some time, some penance. Surely not to a place of sonship again, at least not like it was before. I mean, just think of what this young man did. He brought shame upon his father. He embarrassed him in the family and in the community. What would the town people think if he came home and dad accepted him with full arms? He's got a reputation to keep up. You see that? Verse 20. So he got up and went to his father. If this were a show or a movie, this would be the commercial break or the to be continued next week. But I won't keep you waiting. We're going to keep reading. Still in 20. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. What does this tell you about the Father? What does this tell you about God? The whole time that the son was off squandering his wealth, what was the father doing? Watching for his boy to come home. This is just beautiful, right? Some things are better caught than taught. The fact that he is there looking out his window or in front of his home, waiting for that boy to come home. What made him think that he would come home? Dad's been waiting. But wait. Dad's been waiting, but maybe he is angrily waiting. Angrily waiting for the prodigal to come home. As a teenager, did you ever come home late and your sibling says, Dad's waiting for you? Is Dad... Oh, he's waiting for the prodigal, all right. Keep reading. And was filled with compassion for him. What? Why would you have compassion towards someone who wanted you dead, basically treated you as if you're dead, who brought shame upon you? And notice what the father does next. What does it say? He ran to his son. Do you remember, have I ever said about running in Bible times? If you had to run as a male, what did you have to do? If you're wearing a what? A robe. If you're going to run, you're going to have to do what in order to go fast? What do you got to do? You're going to have to lift up your robe so you can run faster. What's lifting up a robe going to do? It's going to expose. That's shameful. That's embarrassing. Dad says, I don't care. I'm running. What if people see you? I don't care. Important people, they didn't run. If you want to keep your dignity, you didn't run. He runs to his son, look at it, threw his arms around him and kissed him. Now remember, this son has a prepared speech that he's going to give to his father. But before he can open his mouth, Dad lavishes affection upon him. And I want you to think about his dad hugging him and kissing him, and it's fun to remember a few things. How long had the son been traveling? I don't know, but he's in the far country. What climate is this? It's the Middle East, so think what? Hot. Think body odor. Think sweat. What kind of work had he been doing? Working with pigs? I mean, can you imagine what he smelled like? And what does Dad do? Receives him wholeheartedly. Right? He embraces the smelly and filthy son. You would almost think that the father in this story represents the God of all creation. And if so, and it does, what does this say about God and whom God receives? Verse 21. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Stop here. Verse 22 will have the father cut off the son's speech. But you compare what is said here in verse 21 with what his prepared speech was in verses 18 and 19. Here in verse 21, he does repeat his prepared speech, but after saying he was no longer worthy to be called his son, his next request is to be made like one of the hired men, and yet Father cuts him off. He doesn't get to make that request. The Father cuts him off. Why does the Father cut him off? Anything significant about that? I don't think it's because he's being rude, but maybe he was expecting his son to make the request of being a hired servant. But he cuts off his son's speech, and I see it as a way of saying that, son, you don't even need to go that route because I got bigger plans for you than just a hired hand. How many ever think that they've blown it with God? Come on, is there any honesty in this room? Have you ever failed God? That God can't use you ever again? Lord, receive me as your own, and that's it, and I'll just stay on the sidelines. And I see in here as a way of God saying, oh, don't shortcut. I can use you in a mighty way. I can use you in a mighty way. So he cuts off his son's speech. The son doesn't even get to ask to be a hired hand. Verse 22. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. I think all this would have cultural significance. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again, and he was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. I want you to think of honor being bestowed to this son. Full rights. The father is very generous to this son. The same son who basically treat his dad as dead. The father calls for celebrating. He asks for a fattened cow. This refers to a grain-fed calf. So what are we talking here? We're talking good meat, right? They didn't eat meat back then like we do today, so this would have been a very special occasion. Bible teacher Warren Risby writes, everything the younger son had hoped to find in the far country, he discovered back home. Clothes, jewelry, friends, joyful celebration, love, and assurance for the future. You see, people convince themselves that life apart from God, life away from the Lord, is more freeing, more celebratory, and yet where does it lead? On a lesser scale, how often do we go off to the far country, even where we are, don't even physically move, but how often do we go off to the far country, as it were, and can only be found, and only try to find what can only be found in the Lord? Now, this would be a fitting place to end the parable. The prodigal goes home, father receives him, they celebrate. And yet, remember, this one has a twist, unlike the previous two. This is a parable about two sons. The emphasis thus far has been on the younger son, but what about the older son? And remember who these parables are being spoken to. Verse 2, the scribes and Pharisees. Jesus says he was speaking to them, verse 3. And remember, these parables are Jesus' defense on why he hangs out with so-called bad people, the same ones the scribes and Pharisees despised. Verse 25. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. Now, I want you to read between the lines here. Why did the older son not know anything about this party going on? Why wasn't he informed that dad was throwing a huge party? I mean, it kind of sounds like he is learning now for the first time that younger brother has come home. What does this tell you? It makes you wonder about this older son and his father's relationship. That maybe the older son was a lot like his younger brother once was. That is, maybe the older son is actually the prodigal. See the twist there? Oh, sure, he stayed around. He didn't run off with dad's money. But maybe he wasn't the perfect son as he's going to portray himself. He could convince the community that I'm the good son, I stayed around. While, younger brother, he ran off and did his party. But something as simple as him not even knowing that a party was going on that his father was throwing, that tells me that maybe he doesn't even have a relationship with his father. In context, who does the older son represent? The scribes and the Pharisees, who want to portray themselves as favored by God when they didn't know him. So if the father represents God and the elder son represents the scribes and the Pharisees, the text, who does the younger son represent? The tax collectors and the sinners of verse 1, right? And just as the Pharisees and the scribes were angry that these people were coming to Jesus, check out this older son, verse 28. The older brother became angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. Note the stubbornness of the older brother. He's angry, he refuses to go in. But notice the actions of the father. He goes out and pleads with the oldest son. If he goes out, that means he leaves the party. I want you to see about what the father really thinks about this older son. You might think that he doesn't like his older son because of the way he lives. No, he leaves a party to go out and plead with his son. What can we conclude? That dad wants both sons inside to celebrate. If you were to ask, which son did the father show more favoritism towards? I'd say neither. He wanted both sons at the party, but one son, the older son, refuses to go in. Watch his words, verse 29. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Now this is fun. Are we awake? I want you to compare the first words of the son, of the younger son to the father, and the first words of the older son to the father. The first words we have of the younger son to the father is in verse 21. He says what? Father, I have sinned. The first words of the older son to his father here in verse 29 is basically, to summarize it, I've been nothing but a servant and worked hard. I've been faithful. You note the contrast? Would you rather be someone who says, I have sinned, or, look, I've been serving you? Just notice the contrast here. And he has the audacity to say that all these years, he's never disobeyed father's orders. Yeah, you did, verse 28. Dad says, come inside, and you didn't do it. Verse 29, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. In other words, this son thinks he has earned his father's approval. And note what he wants to do with what he thinks he's entitled to. He wants a goat so that he can do what? Not hang out with dad, but what? Go out and celebrate with my friends. Isn't that what the younger son originally wanted? Give me what I want and let me go off and do my own thing. I mean, the ironic question here is, who's the real prodigal in the story? The older son would rather hang out with his friends than his own father. But the older son, he's not done talking. You ever notice that when some people, the more they talk, the more they incriminate themselves? Verse 30. The older son's still speaking. But when this son of yours, now did you catch the language? He didn't say, my brother. He says what? This son of yours. Catch that? Keep reading. Who has squandered your property with prostitutes. Now how does he know that? He might not even know that his son came, or his brother came home. Not that his son may not have done this, but anyway. Comes home, you kill a fattened calf for him. Question, what does this older son base his worth on? If you want to be a miserable person, you know what you do? Compare yourself to others. Compare yourself to others. I am good because I'm not as bad as Frank over here. At least I've never done what Frank did. That makes me special. That makes me worthy. Isn't that what we do? Try to justify our sin, even our accomplishments, because I'm not like this person over here. Verse 31. My son, the father said. Better translation, my child. This is affection here. This is not dad who is, you blew it, older son. This is a dad who loves his older son too. You are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Previously, the older son says, this son of yours. Dad turns it around and says, this brother of yours. It just as in the previous two parables, there was rejoicing when that which was lost is found. Likewise, in this parable, there was rejoicing because the lost son was found. And it's open-ended. That's the story ends. We're left to wonder, what happens? What does the older son do? It's almost like it's crafted in such a way that the reader needs to make their own decision what they're going to do in their own life. Let me leave you with a thoughtful question, and then we're going to do communion. This goes off something I read recently. You think of the older son, and really, we, the readers, we did not know his true character until after his brother came home, right? We just assumed he's a faithful son. He's stayed back. He didn't do what his younger brother did. But now knowing what we do know about him, do you think his younger son, or do you think the younger son, younger brother, knew about his older brother's character all along? I think so. I think so. That perhaps, the text doesn't say this, but just entertain it. The younger son was hesitant to come home because he thought maybe his older brother would stand in the way of dad receiving him back. That if he came home, his older brother would be right there next to father, reminding his dad, remember, he treated you as dead. Remember what he did, the embarrassment he brought upon you. Remember, he went off to a far country. Remember this, right? And so perhaps the younger son feared such accusations which kept him from returning. In other words, the older son would not have been representing his father well. And the thought is, how many of those who have gone off to the far country, they sow their wild oats, they want to come home, but they're reluctant to come home back because of pharisaical, is that the right word? People, even Christians. And that these prodigals have the wrong impression of God because of so-called older brothers who have misrepresented the father. And so I think a good reminder is to represent the father well. Would you bow with me? And as I bow, if the men can come forward for the communion time. Lord, this is such a powerful story about the kind of people that you reach out to, but also a heart for all people. We see your patience with the prodigal. We see your persistence with the older son. And we see you in all this. We see a God who, as it were, looks out over his porch and longs for that child to come home. A God who goes out and says, come, party with us. Lord, wherever anybody who hears my voice is in this story, Lord, press it upon them. We might find aspects of ourselves in that younger son. We might be in this building this morning, but we're still off in the far country. We might have aspects of the older son where, we're here, or we have perfect attendance, but we really don't have a relationship. Now's the time to just put that stake in the ground and recommit ourselves to you. To come home. I've sinned. Receive me back. And if we can make that a mission, you will receive us. Lord, so many good truths in this passage. But we know that forgiveness is possible because of what Jesus did many years ago. Yes, you receive sinners back, but it's on the basis, not on our goodness, but on the goodness of Jesus Christ. He gave his perfect life for our sin that we commemorate even now. In Jesus' name, amen.